Hello, everyone. I want to ask you a question. Um, have you ever had a conversation with someone and they were so down in the dumps? They were so negative about everything. It was just sucking the energy out of you. I actually was having a conversation with someone several years ago, and I'm not going to name who it was because it's someone that I care about, and I what's important is what happened during that conversation. And I want to dive into some of this today: grief and gratitude, how both of those impact our lives, and how it impacts your leadership, and how your leadership can impact both of those. I am Angela W. Stillwell. I am the CEO and founder of Untapped Strengths, and I work with individuals to transform them into top 1% leaders and teams into powerhouses. And part of how I do that is really digging into what is happening from a mental standpoint, right? What are the things that are going on in someone's mind that is keeping them where they are, or keeping them from getting to where they want to go, not necessarily keeping them where they are. Maybe it's even making them go backwards. And that was the case with this person that I was just referring to. So again, several years ago, I was having a conversation with someone and they just were so much in a place of blame and shame and guilt, and really pointing the finger at all these other people and all of these other situations. And I stopped them and I said, tell me one thing that you're grateful for right now. Tell me one thing you're grateful for. And this person literally could not come up with one thing, not one. Think about that for a minute. Have you ever been in a place where you couldn't find one thing you were grateful for? Look, we all go through seasons where life is really hard. And if you haven't had tragedy or you haven't had loss in your life up to this point, odds are good that it will happen at some point in the future. I don't know that any of us escape life without having some form of tragedy or loss occur that we then deal with. And this week being Thanksgiving here in the US, I felt like this was just such a great time to talk about this concept. Um, Grief looks very different for every person, and there are actually multiple things that we grieve. We often think of grief being about losing someone, right? Um, where we've lost a loved one and we grieve that loss. But there's actually other things that we grieve. My friend Dr. Joan Rosenberg, she points out that we grieve things that we loved that we lost. Okay, that's one. That's the one that I was just talking about. The second is we grieve things that we got that we never wanted. Okay. And that gets a little tricky. We don't think of that necessarily as grief, but there's the same process that you go through. But then you also grieve the things that you wanted that you never got. Okay. So I know. I'll give you a personal example. So I wanted children and I don't have children, and there are times when I grieve the fact that I was never able to have children. And so, it we all have these different areas where we grieve. What's important though is what you do with that. Okay, what's important is what you do with that. So when you're in this place of grief, because so many people often just get stuck, they get stuck in this cycle of grief. And there's basically five different components to grief. There's denial and anger and um shock and acceptance, and I can't remember all of them. I don't remember all of the cycles of grief, but there's a Kubler-Ross um um diagram that you can look up, or system that you can look up on grief, and what those stages of grief are. And here's the thing with grief: you can end up in any of those stages at any time with anything that you are grieving. So remember, there's we grieve things that we loved that we lost, we grieve things that we got that we didn't want, and we grieve things that we wanted and we never got. So you can find yourself in any of those at any time, in any of the cycle with any of those three at any time. Now, why am I saying grief and gratitude? Well, like I said, this is Thanksgiving week here in the US, and everybody's talking about being thankful, having gratitude. People are doing lots of gratitude posts. This is a time where people start doing a gratitude post every day for the rest of the year. And then there are people like the person that I referenced, where they literally could think of nothing that they were grateful for. And so in the middle of that conversation, I said to them, really, you can't think of one thing that you're grateful for? And they were like, nope, can't think of a single thing. Not one thing. And I was like, what about the air that you're breathing? What about the phone that you're having this conversation on with me? What about the fact that you have children? What about the fact that, and I listed off money in your pocket, your bills are paid. What about a bed that you sleep in, a roof over your head? Maybe it's not the roof that you want, but it's a roof over your head, and you have a bed that you're sleeping in. And what about the people, the laughter in your life? And what about, and I went through this whole thing, and they still were right in that same place. They were like, yeah, well, yeah, okay. So my question for you is, how often do you find yourself in a place where you are choosing, because that's a choice, you're choosing to stay in that place of not being grateful, right? Of not being grateful, or choosing to stay in a cycle of grief. Because it's a choice. You do get to choose to come out of it. I was listening to, I read, and okay, you guys, I'm kind of weird. I buy a book, and then I also get the Audible version of it because I like both. I like the hard copy, and I like the Audible version that I can listen to, because I can listen to it quicker than I can read it, typically because of focus time, windshield time, etc. And so I'll listen to books while I'm doing other things, and then if there's something that's important, I put a bookmark on the electronic version, and then I go back to the hard copy and I do the work from the hard copy of the book. Anyway, so I was listening to Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan's book called The Gap and the Gain, and it's based on a concept that Dan Sullivan came up with in Strategic Coach called the gap and the gain. And he had this client that was very much like this person that I was having a conversation with several years ago. And this person could think of nothing that had gone well in their business. And so Dan, listened to them and said, well, if you could think of something, what might it be? And the guy came up with a couple of things. Well, if I could think of something, it could be this, or it could be that, or it could be blah, blah, blah. And so Dan came up with this concept of the gap and the gain. And the gap is where you are comparing yourself to your ideal, or you're comparing yourself to someone else. And that always leaves you in a gap. Your ideal can never be achieved, because once you get close to it, guess what? Your ideal gets further away, right? If you're a high achiever, especially, you are constantly pushing that goalpost out. So if you're comparing yourself to your ideal, you're always going to be in that gap and feeling less than, right? You're keeping yourself in this place of not feeling like you have achieved. You're choosing to keep yourself in a place of not being grateful for what has happened. Okay. And the gain is where you look at yourself from the past, right? You have your goals because your goals help pull you forward, right? Your goals help drive you to get to your next level. And in order to stay in the gain, because remember, your goals are going to continue to shift. They're going to continue to move, right? We talk about the goalpost moving. That's what happens with goals. You achieve one as a high achiever, you achieve one and you're on to the next, you're on to the next, you're on to the next. That's what we do to ourselves as high achievers. It's good It's good. It's great in a lot of ways because it keeps us going. It keeps us driven. However, it also keeps us in a place of feeling less than because we're never hitting that ideal. So, in order to be in the gain, what we get to do is look backwards. Okay. And when we look backwards at where we were a week ago, a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, what are the gains that you have made? What can you be grateful for from that time frame, right? And if you find yourself in a situation where you're still having a tough time coming up with something that you're like, yeah, I get to celebrate something because there's a whole process that your brain goes through. And when you're celebrating, your brain's like, oh yeah, I get to achieve again. I get to achieve again. It's a good thing to achieve. It's a good thing to recognize the goodness and be thankful for, right? And then it just makes it that much easier. There's a whole neurochemical process that happens in your brain and in your body when you celebrate. Okay. So when you celebrate and you notice that you're in that gain, you notice what you have achieved from your past self, not your ideal self, not someone else's ideal self, from your past to where you are now, not where you're going, where you are now, right? Then celebrate that. Now, if you find yourself in a place where you can't figure out what to be grateful for, there was a process that Ben talked about in the book, and psychologists call it, and I've got it on my phone right here, mental subtraction. Okay, mental subtraction. So when you really want to build up and celebrate and really develop those neurochemicals that can positively impact whatever it is that you're working on, this process of mental subtraction is a great process to take yourself through in order to really be in that place of gratitude and that place of thankfulness. So what you do with mental subtraction, I'm going to kind of read this. I made a voice note, so the verbiage on this is not perfectly clean. So I'm going to be deciphering some of it. So mental subtraction is looking back at something that you have. Okay. It's looking at something that you have, right? Maybe it's even something that you don't feel super positive about. Okay. In fact, this is a really good process to take yourself through if there's something you're not feeling positive about. Maybe you've had a relationship that went really south. Maybe you've been through a divorce. Maybe you've had a major fight. Maybe there is a relationship at work that is not great. Maybe there is, again, some type of tragedy or loss that you have experienced, right? And you're thinking, how do I find gratitude in the middle of tragedy? How do I find gratitude in the middle of loss? How do I find gratitude in these places that everyone around me is seeing as negative? So this process of mental subtraction will help you with that. All right. So you look back at something that you have. Okay. Now, what if you didn't have it? What if the person that maybe you're now divorced from, or maybe you've had an argument with, what if you lost that person? Like, they're gone, because it happens. It absolutely happens. And if you've not experienced it, again, be super grateful that you've not yet experienced it, because it happens in life. We lose people that we love. We lose people that are important to us. We lose people that have had impact in our lives, and that impact is important to us. Okay. And sometimes we lose people that we don't love, but they still had a great impact in our lives. Right. So if you lost that person, or if you never had that person, if that person was never in your life, or that situation was never in your life, right? So he says, all right, so what if you didn't have it? What if you never had it? What if you lost it? Think about each of those scenarios. What if you lost it? What if you never had it? Okay. What would that look like? How would you feel? What would that impact be? And you really take yourself into the place of feeling the emotion of, if you never had it, what would that impact be? What would the impact be? If the person that you're so angry with, or the person that you're divorced, if you never had that person in your life, what would the impact be? Maybe there are children. You wouldn't have those children. Maybe you'd have different children, but you wouldn't have the children that you have, right? There are experiences that you wouldn't have, positive experiences. There's knowledge that you've gained. There's lessons you've learned that you wouldn't have had you not ever had that person in your life. How does that feel to not have any of those things in your life? Like, really dig in there, okay? Because what happens is you start finding ways to appreciate the difficulties in life. You start finding ways to be grateful for the harder lessons in life. You start finding ways to um, to be thankful for where you currently are. And listen, there are people who are going to try to make you feel guilty about not being in that place of grief anymore, or not being in that place of anger anymore, or not being in this place of feeling shame or guilt anymore. And those are not the people that you get to listen to now. You get to listen to the voice in your head that goes, you know what, you're right. If I hadn't have had that experience, or if I didn't have this person, then I wouldn't have XYZ, right? So the grief process, it's important. I'm not saying don't grieve. I'm saying grieve. Go through the anger, go through the denial, go through that process. That's healthy. Feel those emotions. And maybe use this mental subtraction process, right? That allows you to feel emotions and gratefulness in a way that you've never felt before. In fact, what Ben Hardy was talking about in the book is that studies actually show when you take yourself through this mental subtraction process, you actually feel even more gratitude about the situation than you would if you just were going back and thinking to when you gain whatever it is that you gained. Okay. So maybe let's go back to the uh, divorce issue, and I'm bringing this up because I have a lot of clients and friends who have been divorced, and they'll talk negatively about their exes, and there were positive things that did come from it. Okay, so if all you do is you think about the positive things, yes, you can find gratitude in that place. However, going through this mental subtraction process actually takes you to a whole higher, deeper level of gratitude and thankfulness than you could achieve otherwise. And they've done that by doing blood work and brain scans and that kind of stuff. So science has actually proven this mental subtraction process works better than just talking yourself into being grateful. Okay. All right. So grief and gratitude. Yes, they both serve a place in your life. They both serve a place in life. And my challenge for you during this week of Thanksgiving and during this holiday season is to find ways that you can use mental subtraction. Like, just go through, like, if you're at a family event and there's someone there that you just, ugh, what if that person didn't exist? What if that person didn't exist? What if they never existed? What would life look like? What would the impact be? Really envision it, because if they're in your family, there's probably something good somewhere along the line that has come from it. You may have to dig, okay? You may have to dig, and it's worth the digging. Because let me tell you something. If you're walking around with anger and frustration about a person or a situation, you can't hold that and gratitude at the same time. You can't. Those are two opposing thoughts. Your brain can't hold both at the same time. And studies show that being in a place of gratitude and thankfulness and joy and happiness serves you in ways that all of the frustration and anger never will. And again, I'm not saying never be angry. I'm not saying never grieve. I'm not saying never feel frustrated. Look, you're human. I'm human. We're all human. We're going to feel those emotions. And when you recognize feeling those emotions, it's not about being righteous and being right. Okay. It's about, okay, yeah, I'm feeling this. What's it about? And then can you use the mental subtraction to get you to a place that serves you, that helps you get to the gain rather than the gap? Okay. You want to spend the vast majority of your time in the gain. You're not going to be able to spend 100% of your time in the gain because you're human. Okay. That's not even possible. That's that ideal thing, right? That is never achievable. You can, though, increase the percentage of time that you spend in the gain versus in the gap. All right. Okay. So with all of that said, listen, that gap, that grieving, that frustration, those are all things that will keep you blocked, and they will keep you from getting closer to your ideal. Remember, you're never going to achieve your ideal. So what if you could have something that would help you reveal those blind spots? I've just taken you through one process. What if there are other processes? Well, if you go to my link tree, you will find right at the top, there's a link to a free resource for you that it's a workbook style. Okay, it is. I'm not going to lie. It's a workbook style that allows you to walk through. There's 13 different things that often people find are keeping them stuck, right? They're blind spots that people don't realize are keeping them in status quo. They're keeping them stuck. They're holding them back. They're keeping them in the gap, as Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan call it. Okay. So go get your copy. Again, it's at the link tree. You can go to linktree, linktr.ee/AW Stillwell and get your copy. And I'd love feedback, right? I'd love feedback from you. What did you think about today? What do you think about this idea of mental subtraction? What do you think about gratitude practices? Share with me. Let me know. And what is it that you are super grateful for? And if you can't find the Linktree piece, just leave a comment and we will be sure to get back with you. This is being broadcast on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So we will be checking comments and DMs in each of those places to see if we can do anything to help you get your copy of the 13 strategies. All right. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving for those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving. And if you're not celebrating Thanksgiving, what can you be grateful for? What can you be thankful for? Even though you're not celebrating the US version of Thanksgiving, what is it that you're super grateful for? I'm super grateful for each one of you who take time to watch this, whether you are on here with me live or whether you watch the replay, whatever your preference is. I am so incredibly grateful for the time that you spend with me each week. And I can't wait to spend more time with you. Have a great week, and I will see you next Wednesday.